Hello, my name is Nick Deborah. I'm an independent instructor and best-selling author in the fields of data visualization and dashboard design. And in this video, I want to basically talk about how I've sort of rethought one of the parts of the practical charts course that I teach, which is specifically around what are called step charts. And so I think a good example of when to use a step chart might be in a situation like this, where we're showing the price history of this fictional television model here. And we can see, for example, that the price was at the beginning of April here was about $400, and then it instantaneously dropped down to 350, for example, at the beginning of May, and then continue to change. And so I do think, like I said, this is a good use of this chart type, unlike what a lot of people do, which is to use kind of a more standard line chart. I actually see two problems here. The first is that in this case, it kind of looks like there was a price at the beginning of April that was $400. And then there was kind of nothing until the beginning of May when it was 350, but that's not the case, right? We can see here that was actually $400 the whole time. And maybe even a bigger concern is that people with maybe a little bit less chart reading experience might read this to mean that the price kind of steadily declined from $400 to 350, right? In the middle of April, let's say it was like 375. And so I do think that there are times when it does make sense to use a step chart, which kind of begs the next question, which of course I talk about in my course, which is exactly what is different here. Why did it make sense to use a step chart in this particular situation? And so what I talked about up until now anyways, was that there were really two conditions that needed to be met in order to use a step chart. The first is that the values occur at irregular intervals of time, right? And so for the price of a television, for example, it might change price 5 times in one day and then stay the same for 3 weeks, especially if it's on a site like Amazon or something. And then the second criterion was that these values persist until the next value occurs. And so when the price drops from, say, $400 to 350, that 350 value remains in effect until the next price change occurs. And when you know this, you start to see these kind of irregular persistent time series all over the place in things like the balance of a bank account, the inventory level of a product, the current high bid of an auction item, the current long jump distance world record. And this is what I've been teaching for actually a number of years. But then in a recent workshop in Belgium, this smart cookie here, Paula, I hope I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Marchi de Madeiros, one of the participants, described a situation which was where maybe this wouldn't actually apply. And so the chart she described was something like this. And so this is a chart that she created for like an electrical utility company that produces electricity. And the way that that company priced their electricity was that they basically had a new price every hour, is dynamic pricing. And so at the beginning of each hour, there was a new price. Obviously, this was to encourage people to use electricity during times of low demand. The thing is, with this chart, these are actually values that are updated at regular intervals of time, right? There's always exactly one update per hour. And yet I kind of agreed with her that this was actually a good use for a step chart, even though it didn't meet one of the criteria that I talked about before. If we had used a standard line chart instead, I think this would actually be a little bit less effective because it kind of looks like each value is sort of like a summary value for the hour, but it's not, right? This, I think, describes the data more correctly, more accurately, where there is a price that kicks in at the beginning of each hour, and it basically remains in effect until the next price change occurs. But then she described another chart like this. And so this one is showing similar data, but it's actually kind of aggregated. What we're seeing here is the average daily electricity price over the course of about 13 days here. And so each value is actually the average of the 24 prices that occurred during that day. And so she would show this as a standard line chart. And actually, I kind of agree with it in this case. You know, if we were to show this kind of data as a step chart, it would sort of suggest that there is like an average price, for example, that kicked in at the beginning of this day and then was in effect until the very end of the day. But that's not really how an average works, right? An average is just a single value that kind of represents the whole day. It doesn't start at the beginning of the day and end at the end of the day. And so, again, I agreed with her that, yeah, this is actually a good use case for a standard line chart. And so what's the difference here? Well, I think we want to use a step chart when, like I said, the values are persistent, right? So these are values that come into effect at the beginning of each time period, and they remain in effect until the next value occurs. The change now, the new thing, is that I think this is going to be the case regardless of whether the values occur at regular or irregular intervals of time, right? As long as they're persistent, use a step chart. You would use then a standard line chart when the values, of course, are not persistent, right? And so, for example, if there's, we have, let's say, two time periods and there's no value for the next time period, well, the value from the previous time period doesn't persist until into the next time period, right? There would just be no value for that time period, right? If we have an average price for, October 10th, and we don't have an average price for October 11th, we don't use the value from October 10th for October 11th. There's just no value for the 11th. And so in this case, each value represents a time period. It doesn't span the time period. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. And so coming back to the slide that I was using in my workshop, I kind of have to change it now, right? That first criterion actually doesn't really apply. And so there's another change which I need to make to my course, which is when I talk about this decision tree, which is basically kind of a guide to choosing chart types for showing data over time. That includes step charts. And so this part, or these parts rather, of the decision tree relate to step charts. And so based on the important point that Paula made, I actually have to make a change here so that the logic is a little bit different. And so because I'm going to be updating this decision tree, there's actually another change that I've been wanting to make for a while, which is down here around chart types for showing cyclical data, like data with seasonality, for example. These aren't really chart types, actually. They're more chart techniques. And so I wanted to actually kind of remove those for a little while. And so the new decision tree actually now looks like this. Nice thing too is that it's a little bit cleaner, I think, a little bit perhaps easier to use. And I think it, of course, reflects when to use a step chart more accurately, right? If the values are persistent, you just use a step chart, regardless of whether the values are updated at regular or irregular intervals of time. I'm still going to talk about showing cyclical time series in the course, but I'm going to describe these as chart techniques rather than chart types. But they will still be in the course, just kind of by the way. This is really important, I think, to always be open to new suggestions. I rely heavily, in fact, on the people who take my courses to point things out like this and tell me when there's maybe something that a particular use case or circumstance where a guideline that I'm recommending maybe wouldn't apply or would need to be altered in order to be sort of as practical as possible. So I want to thank Paula and the many, many other people over the years who have pointed this kind of thing out. They helped me make the course better, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And I hope that it continues. I expect that I'm going to be making these kinds of changes for the foreseeable future, right? That's what progress looks like. If you found this to be of interest, join my mailing list. The QR code or link are up here. Usually 1 to 3 emails a month about how to improve your data visualization and or dashboard design skills. And thanks very much for watching.